thank you to Howard Kurtz. Thank you for coming to visit us.
Great to be here.
It is a busy cycle, and we have a lot of need for you to kind of tell us what's going on in the rest of the media.
Non-stop.
Yeah, it's unending. Anyway, thanks to all of you.
Sure.
We are back here at noon Eastern tomorrow. So for now, let's go over to Harris.
We begin with a Fox News alert. Fiery words from Iran from President Trump as we go outnumbered overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. President Trump sent an all-caps warning to the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani after the leader told Iranian diplomats that Americans, quote, must understand that war with Iran is the mother of all wars. The president tweeted, "Never, ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious." Notice the all caps. It's on your screen. The president's late-night tweet followed a blistering speech yesterday by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, where he compared Iran's regime to the mafia and accused them of double-dealing.
The level of corruption and wealth among Iranian leaders shows that Iran is run by something that resembles the mafia more than a government. At the same time, they're trying to convince Europe to stay in the nuclear deal. They're covertly plotting terrorist attacks in the heart of Europe.
White House correspondent Kevin Cork has more from the North Lawn. Kevin?
Harris, good afternoon. What you are noticing here is a coordinated effort by the Trump administration not only to show support for the Iranian people, but most obviously to criticize the leadership in Tehran. You mentioned it yesterday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo with that searing speech criticizing the Iranian regime, likening them to the mafia. He also went so far as to suggest they've done very little to elevate their people while continuing to destabilize the entire globe.
We have an obligation to put maximum pressure on the regime's ability to generate and move money, and we will do so. At the center of this campaign is the reimposition of sanctions on Iran's banking and energy sectors.
Meanwhile, as you can imagine, there has been mixed reaction to that speech. One person who's certainly feeling very strongly about it on the positive side is Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister. He said this, first, I'd like to praise the strong stance presented yesterday by President Trump and Secretary of State Pompeo against the aggression of the regime in Iran. For years, this regime was pampered by the powers, and it's good to see that the United States is changing this unacceptable equation. Meanwhile, Harris, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani issued a stern warning, as you pointed out, to President Trump against, quote, provoking Tehran through sanctions. He said this really raised some eyebrows. Mr. Trump, don't play with the lion's tail. This would only lead to regret. Now, White House officials we've spoken to here tell Fox News that talk like this will only end badly for those in power in Tehran. Let me share very quickly a statement from John Bolton, the ambassador, of course, the national security advisor now. He said, I spoke to the president over the last several days, and President Trump told me that if Iran does anything at all to the negative, they will pay a price like few countries have ever paid before. War of words indeed, Harris, and we'll certainly get more readout as we look forward to the briefing coming up with Sarah Sanders this afternoon at 2. But for now, back to you.
All right, Kevin, one thing I noticed, though, is consistency. People said they wanted consistency with this president and his advisors. I think we're seeing that on this issue. Great to see you. For more, we are joined by my first guest, Republican Congressman Doug Collins of Georgia, who serves as a vice chair of the House Republican Conference. Great to see you today. Let's start with that consistency of message. Is this policy or something else?
I think it's a new regime that we've seen in Washington, D.C. that's decided that Iran doesn't need pampering and coddling. Iran needs to actually be stood up to. And the president's doing that. He said he would. He's doing it. Again, it's keeping promises. And I think that's what's happening in our foreign policy. And those who want to do us harm, those who want to do their European neighbors harm, they're finding out that they're messing with the wrong president.
You know what? Let's just look at Iran for a second, because this is a country that is used to a former president that would do a deal against all odds and put some language inside deals that the American public has yet to see any of. And now he's dealing with somebody that'll open up Tomahawk missiles on Syria after the use of chemical weapons, something very different than a previous president. So what does this mean for Iran?
Well, I think it means that they can no longer manipulate a weak and meandering president that they had in President Obama, who just wanted to apologize to the world and be a weak link in basically a security chain. When you face a bully, when you face someone who wants to say one thing on one side and then seed death and destruction around the world another. They do not need to be played with. They need to be stood up to and said, if you want to keep your own people down, if you want to put the boot of oppression on your own people, do that. But you're not going to do it outside, and we're going to try everything to empower your people to make sure that they understand that there is a world out there that they're keeping them from. Rouhani is the wrong end of the tail here. He doesn't want to mess with this president.
You know, the use of the word lion's tail, you don't want to get hit by that. You know, I'm going to look at their economy for a second, because you might call it the back end of success. They are definitely feeling perhaps the threat of more sanctions.
Oh, they will be. And the thing about it is it influences Rouhani and the rest of the mullahs and the others who run. Believe me, they're not hurting. They're hurting the rest of their people. And they know that if those sanctions come, what little crumbs and little stuff they give out to their people to keep them at bay will no longer be there. And this is a thriving country that is one that could be so magnificent on the world stage. The Iranian people are great, but they are being held hostage by their own government. And hopefully as they rise up, as we've seen little sparks of that, we can support that. And I think that's what the president's doing.
So, Congressman Collins, we certainly don't need the permission of our Western allies to put a word out, don't threaten us. We might need them in order to carry out a threat. So I'm just curious, where does this leave them? Because some of them are still doing, everything they can to make a deal happen that they can stay in with Iran, which puts them in a very capitulated position, potentially.
I'm not seeing how some of our Western European allies can look Israel in the face and look other places in the world in the face and actually say, really, we're going to appease Iran. We prefer our money deals than we do to what is right and terrorism. When they look at their own people and the terrorism that Iran is plotting inside of Europe, and they're still wanting to protect their business deals, there's a problem at the top there. That's a principle problem. They need to choose the principles over the money, and I think that's where they need to come back to. We've seen that in the past. The president will lead the way. Hopefully they'll come on board.
So generally, how does it work? Do we sanction after rhetoric like this from Rouhani and some of the other religious clerics there, or do we wait for action? And what do you think that action might look like?
Look, Harris, they've provided all the action needed. I was one of the ones who did not like the Obama bad deal to start with. I voted against it, did not think it was helpful. History has proven me right, and many others on the Hill right. I think what we need to do is go back to the reason they even wanted to talk to the appeasement of the Obama administration was because the sanctions were working. Their people were feeling the pinch. We've got to go back to what actually caused it. Unfortunately, Obama thought they came to the table wanting to be a good player. He failed to realize it was the sanctions that brought him to the table, and as soon as he paid them off with a little money to give to their people, they went back to their old ways. They've already broke that deal in many ways. Now's the time for action.
Real quickly before I let you go, it's almost what I hear you saying is that the Iranian people now are kind of being held captive by this deal as well. It didn't benefit them because the people who lead them had no intentions of making life better for them. Real quick.
No, all they had is make life better for themselves and keep them down. Mike Pompeo hit it perfectly yesterday.
All right. Congressman Collins of the great state of Georgia, great to have you today. Thank you.
Harris, always good to be with you.
Let's bring in Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, a senior fellow and military expert at Defense Priorities. Colonel Davis retired from the Army after 21 years of active service, which included 4 deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Great to see you today. Thank you for being on the program. So what would it look like militarily when the president makes when he makes a comment like this on Twitter? The world takes us more seriously now?
Well, I'll tell you, anytime you make any kind of decision on a foreign power, the decision has to be based on what is going to use American power to the maximum extent to improve our situation. And I'll just tell you right now, I take a bit of a different view of many people right now, is that military force would be the worst thing for American outcomes right now. And the reason I say that is because our overwhelming military capability in comparison to Tehran is almost so great it's not worth mentioning. And that's why when Rouhani says, we're messing with the line of a tail of a lion. No, it's more like the tail of a mouse. I mean, their military capability is not anywhere near, and we don't need to fear Iran.
Right, and the president's tweet then sends out the message that we don't fear Iran.
Right, and there's certainly no problem at all with giving out very clear warnings that if you take any action against American interests, you can count on a very strong response. But we have to be careful that we don't get too casual with the use of military force and use it where it's not necessary, where other means and aspects of American power can accomplish American objectives at a lower cost.
I want to talk with you, Colonel, just about some of the facts on the ground in Syria that we are learning, and the fact that Iran actually has put its guns toward our American people on the ground there fighting against ISIS in the backdrop of that civil war.
Right, and that's some of that happened during the Iraq War in the mid 2000s as well. And any time that happens, without any equivocation or hesitation, America will defend itself, and we will counterattack against any direct attacks against American personnel. That's not even a question. We will definitely do that.
But where would you put Iran's threats? I mean, you've been in that part of the world. You've served in that part of the world. Are they different now? I mean, they've always called for death to America, even when they got tons of cash and a deal that benefited them under the last administration.
Well, now a lot of that is, we have to view it in the context of their domestic policies, and a lot of it is just trying to keep their people in line by, saying here's this foreign devil, this foreign enemy, so gosh, you have to pay attention to us or they'll come and get us. And unfortunately, sometimes our rhetoric gives credence to that and makes it more difficult for us to reach out to those people, because I was actually talking with an Iranian dissident this morning, and he says, some of the best things that we can do, the United States, is to limit some of our talks and a hesitation, because it gives credibility inside of Tehran. What they would rather have is the ability where only thing is at play is the domestic issues, and when that's what's at play, and the mullahs don't have us to point to, they're in trouble, and they are in trouble domestically.
That is really interesting, both the fact that you had that conversation at all, and then the news that came out of it. Real quickly, let's now move on to North Korea. The president expressing denying reports that he's actually angry with the pace of progress in North Korea. Here's what he tweeted: "A rocket has not been launched by North Korea in 9 months. Likewise, no nuclear tests. Japan is happy. All of Asia is happy. But the fake news is saying, without ever asking me, always anonymous sources, that I am angry because it is not going fast enough. Wrong. Very happy." Your response?
Right, and I keep hearing people say things like that as though the expectation is that this would be wrapped up within a matter of weeks, which is just absurd. Any kind of those international negotiations and diplomacy, it takes time, and this is too. But the president is right on the money that they have taken concrete actions. They have stopped making nuclear tests. They have stopped making missile tests, and they've taken a number of other actions as well as a result, not to mention the fact that they gave us back those hostages. So President Trump has gotten a lot so far, and we have not given anything of any tangible matter.
Having grown up military, Colonel Davis, I know that we all, including our military, prefer peace. And we want to give diplomacy a chance. It's interesting to me that the old ways had 25 years to not get us any further, and the new ways have been basically just about a month. And there's so much criticism. Glad to have you on the program. Thank you.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.
President Trump ramping up calls to end the Mueller investigation after newly released documents show the FBI relied heavily on the anti-Trump dossier in obtaining a surveillance warrant on former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. We will talk to, an important day to talk to this gentleman, Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch, who helped get those documents released. Stay close. And President Trump once again defending last week's summit with Russian President Putin. This as some lawmakers are stepping up warnings about Russia's election meddling coming up in November. A live report with analysis.
No election official in America, or in my home state for that matter, should be overconfident. It's not about changing votes. It's about creating chaos.
Fox News alert, the fallout now after newly released FBI documents reveal the anti-Trump dossier played a key role in investigators' push to obtain surveillance on former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. It happened during the height of the 2016 campaign. The president today tweeted, "So we now find out that it was indeed the unverified and fake dirty dossier that was paid for by crooked Hillary Clinton and the DNC, that was knowingly and falsely submitted to FISA, and which was responsible for starting the totally conflicted and discredited Mueller witch hunt!" But Democrats say the documents show that the surveillance of Page was justified and accuse Republicans of trying to undermine the Mueller probe. Watch.
No, those applications set out in some detail, a lot of which unfortunately is redacted, just why the FBI was so concerned that Carter Page might be acting as an agent of a foreign power. And let's remember that application and those renewals have been vindicated in substantial part by Carter Page's own words.
Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington with the latest. Catherine?
Thanks, Harris, and good afternoon. Though heavily redacted, the 412 pages indicate that the Steele dossier was a major component of the October 2016 surveillance warrant application for Trump campaign aide Carter Page. It also shows the dossier was a major component in the subsequent renewals. Based on what's visible, the dossier is not described to the FISA court or the surveillance court as a political document, as the Democrats have asserted. Rather, the FBI speculates to the FISA court that it was commissioned to damage candidate one, who is Donald Trump. The FISA records show a September 2016 Yahoo News article about Carter Page and allegations he was a Russian operative is also a significant part of the application. But Republicans emphasize the Yahoo News report was not a separate stream of intelligence, but rather had the same source as the unverified dossier. Democrats and Republicans exchanged some harsh words on the Sunday talk shows.
We'll never know whether or not the FBI had enough without the dossier, the unvetted DNC-funded dossier, because they included it. And everyone who reads this FISA application sees the amount of reliance they placed on this product funded by Hillary Clinton's campaign and the DNC.
No, of course not. And I think actually if the performance that we had in Helsinki took place before those applications were filed, I think that whole interchange with Putin would have been a central exhibit in the FISA applications.
Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee asked President Trump last month to declassify key sections of the surveillance warrant applications. That's the documents that were released over the weekend about Carter Page, according to this letter obtained by Fox News. The letter also states that on its face, it does appear the Bureau's reliance on the dossier conflicts with the Bureau's own internal and strict rules. Harris.
Catherine, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
This very man, before the commercial break, I told you, a key and important player in all of this. We're glad to get him today. And getting those documents released, Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. Tom, I just want to pause and tell our audience that the journey to get to this point has been long and winding through FOIA requests and so much pressure and work by your team at Judicial Watch. So they're heavily redacted. How surprised or concerned are you about what facts we can see because of all of the redactions?
Well, it's sufficient enough to, what's public is sufficient to draw conclusions that there was corruption in the FISA court process. The DOJ and the FBI misused this Clinton DNC dossier, referred to it 3 times in different ways without telling the court directly, as I call it, a self-licking ice cream cone, and to spy on the Trump team, an extraordinary step by the FBI and DOJ, and it was done without verifying, despite what the document says that it was verified. It wasn't verified. So there are people that need to be held to account for misleading the court. And the other interesting thing is we have to remember this FISA warrant, one of them, the renewals, was issued during the term initially of Mueller's special counsel operation. So the Mueller team has benefited from this illicit FISA application targeting the team of Donald Trump. And so there are real issues about not only the corruption during the Obama administration, but the corrupt use of that document to benefit the Mueller team.
Yeah, corruption is a legal word. I mean, it's not like they finagled or, or were extremely careless or some other words that might not be legal. So what is the course ahead in all of this?
Well, there's more in the application that needs to be declassified. The reason we're able to see these records is because the president declassified this material related to Carter Page in response to Devin Nunes and the Intelligence Committee's request earlier this year. That led to the disclosure of this portion of the FISA application. He needs to do additional declassifications to show what else is in there. Look, there's enough here to raise significant questions about not only how this court was, the courts were abused in this FISA court process, but whether they were abused in other FISA warrants, and just how the whole thing is working generally in terms of allowing this secret process to take place where we're supposed to be relying on the good faith of the government to be honest and forthright with the courts. That didn't happen here.
Yeah, you know, the words that really stood out to me, you said this court was misled. And it does lead you to wonder, well, how often has that happened? Let's just put all of the details of this particular case aside. How often does a secret court get misled and we never find out about it? Here is former U.S. Attorney Andrew McCarthy, and then I'll get your thoughts, Tom.
The judges obviously relied overly, it appears, on the FBI. They trusted that they were following their procedures and they weren't exacting enough. I wasn't saying that the judges should be kicked off the bench, but I think they ought to be asked hard questions. I mean, to me, I look at this application and it's appalling. Right. Yeah, and I don't understand how a judge would. I think if I gave this warrant when I was a prosecutor to a judge down the street in Manhattan, I'd have got my head cut off.
Tom, is any of this complicated at all by the fact that those 4 judges were GOP appointed, or does that not matter?
No, it doesn't matter. They took the government's word at face value, which was a mistake. The judges should be asking themselves whether they need to ask more questions of the DOJ and FBI in the future. You know, we have a law enforcement folks that work with us, and they told us that they would have needed more information than was required here just to get a subpoena for a crack house. The idea that they relied on this garbage, and it is garbage, it's DNC Clinton anti-Trump propaganda, even worse, used or gathered with the help of Russia intelligence, according to the Fusion GPS people. It's laundered into the FBI and DOJ to spy on the Trump team. And when you look at these documents, Harris, it's about Donald Trump and the campaign. Carter Page is a pretext and a vehicle for getting at the Trump campaign. It's a real crisis that the FBI and DOJ was doing this, and they're still unapologetic about it. And there's an ongoing special counsel investigation that's still benefiting from this corruption.
Tom Fitton with Judicial Watch bringing forth a huge effort to get those documents unveiled, if you will, even though they're heavily redacted, in terms of that secret FISA court, which we are all learning more about. Tom, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
President Trump continuing to defend his summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Democrats are pushing back on his claims that it was a great meeting. What lawmakers hope to hear from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo when they question him on the Hill about the summit Wednesday. And progressive heroes, well, they're socialists, really, Democratic socialists. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders say their once radical ideas are now mainstream within the Democratic Party. Are they right about that? And what would that mean for that party heading into the midterm elections? Can you sell socialism in America? Stay close. Our president took to social media to defend his summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin again. He says, when you hear the fake news talking negatively about my meeting with President Putin and all that I gave up, remember, I gave up nothing, nothing in all caps. We merely talked about future benefits for both countries. Also, we got along very well, which is a good thing, except for the corrupt media. This comes as Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is set to appear before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on Wednesday. It's an open-door session. He'll be answering questions about the president's meetings with both Putin and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill, getting an idea, I would imagine, about what senators specifically want to talk about.
Harris, good afternoon. A busy week ahead, and those Republican senators are talking about more sanctions to get tough with Moscow. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham delivered this message on TV to President Trump.
You need to harden our electoral infrastructure, and you need to be the leader of that movement, and you need to work with Congress to come up with new sanctions because Putin's not getting the message.
The most important thing I think we need to focus on now is deterring future attacks by putting in place immediate sanctions that take hold if they do this again.
All of this ahead of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's highly anticipated visit to Capitol Hill on Wednesday. Pompeo is sure to face tough questions about getting North Korea to denuclearize and what happened behind closed doors at the Trump-Putin summit. There's also talk about a likely Trump-Putin 2.0 summit sometime this fall here in Washington. Senator Bob Menendez, a Democrat from New Jersey, was asked about that on Fox News Sunday.
It depends if you challenge him. Now we're going to give him, a red carpet treatment and invite him to Washington. To me, that's beyond comprehension. You can speak to adversaries, but at the end of the day, you have to do it in a way in which you challenge them. The president seems to want to be chummy with Putin instead of challenging him.
Allies of President Trump suggest he will likely learn from the Helsinki summit and is likely to be much tougher with Putin here on his home turf. Harris?
Mike, thank you very much. Let's bring in Florida Republican Congressman Francis Rooney, Vice Chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Great to see you today. Let's talk a little bit about where we are in terms of this. And, the president says that the Obama administration should have let his campaign know that they were being looked at. What do you say?
Well, I think it would have been a good idea. I mean, all this was taking place during the election, when President Obama was the commander-in-chief, and the Russians were, for a very wide extent, creating mayhem in our country. It might have been a good idea to tell both candidates.
Oh, that's interesting, too, because who knew at that point whether or not it wasn't bipartisan?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that it was partisan. I just think they want to disrupt America, disrupt our democratic principles, and sow mayhem, just like they're trying to do in Europe as well.
Are we ready for November?
Oh, I think we're ready for November. I think that we need to step those sanctions up on Russia, and they need to know we mean business, and that we're going to enforce the Magnitsky Act. And I think like Florida, the election architectures need to stay independent of the internet. You can't manipulate the election in Florida because they don't connect to the internet. I think some states still do.
Oh, that's really interesting. I want to know more about that. So was that a decision that was made previous to 2016? I mean, how does that work, and could that be widespread?
Well, Florida did that after all the problems back in 2000, and they overhauled their entire election machinery. And
Sure.
One of the salutary benefits of it is that the local electoral people's computers do not connect to the internet.
That is fascinating. And perhaps we, can learn from that, too, going ahead, since part of what the Democrats are asking is that people not believe everything they see online. That's a tall task. But you can do some things, it sounds like, on the ground with all of this. So, again, I want to get back to where we are in this discussion, because the president has tweeted, he's said some things along the way, and we saw what happened on stage with Putin in the Russian summit. Have we moved past that? And exactly where are we with this conversation right now?
Yeah, I think we've moved past it. I mean, there were some rocky statements made that were walked back, some pretty harsh comments on both sides. But I think at the end of the day, the president said he has confidence in our intelligence agencies and sources, and Russia definitely tried to manipulate or intervene in the American electoral process. So now I just say, let's go forward and figure out how to not let it happen again.
Yeah, I mean, he walked that back maybe a little bit with the word hoax, but we will see what happens forward. Russia and a second summit, an opportunity to do exactly what?
Well, first of all, as a diplomat, I'm a believer in dialogue. We dialogue with Russia all through the Cold War. So one thing that came out of Helsinki is the President and Secretary Pompeo and Ambassador Bolton have resurrected an architecture that's constructive to continuing dialogue. And that might lead to some opportunities both in Syria, some opportunities to maybe do some things with Iran. I mean, Iran doesn't have to be an ally of Russia if we can figure out how to realign these interests.
You've been saying, and not to go too far afield with Iran, but since you brought it up, so Iran has acted independently in the last few hours, threatening us again. The president coming back very tough in all caps on Twitter, and make no mistake about his willingness to carry out what he says. Where do you think that puts Russia now? Because Russia's looking at the situation. They don't want to get caught up in that, I would imagine.
Well, I think it gives us some opportunities to speak with Russia about the long-term evolution of Iran. I wrote an op-ed here a while back arguing that the people of Iran are not necessarily aligned with this heinous mafia-like government, as Secretary Pompeo said, and we have some opportunities to exploit that misalignment the same way we had with Eastern Europe during the Warsaw Pact.
Long-term evolution, that's an interesting point, and we have seen it prior to and since the Cold War. Real quickly before I let you go, Congressman Rooney, with regard to Russia and its neighbors and its bad acting that it has carried out, how do you compare that to where we were just a few years ago? Do you think we're in a better space now to talk with them?
I think that we need to raise the price on their hegemonic aggression. It's not helpful that we let them take Abkhazia and South Ossetia and Nagorno-Karabakh back in 2008. It's not helpful that they marched in and took over Crimea, and now they're virtually abusing the Tatar minority down there. I think we need to be, that's why I think the president did a good thing by putting the javelins into Ukraine. I think putting the Aegis missiles into Romania. You know, we're overcoming kind of 8 years of vacillating weakness in Eastern Europe, and that's what emboldened emboldened Putin. Do you really think he would have done that if Reagan was president?
Wow, this is so interesting. I took a couple of notes, raise the price on the hegemonic aggression moving forward. Great information from you today. Congressman Rooney from the great state of Florida, great to have you. Thank you.
Harris, thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too. The FBI is releasing new documents on their push to obtain surveillance on that former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page during the 2016 election. We've been talking about it, analyzing it, debating it this hour, and now, what will it mean for the Mueller investigation? The power panel will bring it in. Stay close. Back to one of Fox top stories. President Trump going after the Mueller investigation after the FBI released those new documents related to the surveillance warrant on former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page during the 2016 campaign. The president said the documents make it appear his campaign was illegally spied on. But Democrats say they show evidence of Russia's coordination with Carter Page. The power panel now. Kevin McCullough, radio host with Salem Media. Tiffany Cross, co-founder and managing editor of the Beat DC. Great to see you both. Kevin, I want to start with you. We had on Tom Fenton just a few minutes ago from Judicial Watch. A key and important component to at least those 412 pages coming forth, even though they're heavily redacted. Your thoughts?
Well, regardless of what Nancy Pelosi said this morning in her tweet, you've got the Devin Nunes report and you've got the heavily redacted FISA application, and it appears that the application makes the Nunes report look quite accurate. And I think that's going to be problematic because they didn't overstate the case. They said this was the way they went about it, and it looks as though the application is consistent with that. And if that's the case, then most of the case was built around the dossier, not Papadopoulos. The narrative is all whack, and it shows that there was a willingness by FBI and DOJ officials to lie to an actual empowered court. Not once, but a few times, and I think that's problematic. Yeah, just for those people just tuning in and maybe they don't have Papadopoulos at the tip of their tongue, he was a player in all of this that could have been looked at, according to Democrats. But what this shows is that consistency of looking at that anti-Trump dossier. You know, Tiffany, what problems do you think there are with gathering that kind of information that was paid for by the Democratic Party, the DNC in part, the Hillary Clinton campaign? Any party that would pay for opposition material like that and then it being used to get a FISA warrant to spy on the other team?
Well, I just want to set a few facts straight. First, on the payment, it was first paid for by the conservative outlet Washington Free Beacon. But on the actual FISA documents, one, these warrants weren't issued until after Carter Page left the campaign. Two, Carter Page was already gone from the campaign by the time he was surveilled. So there was no spying. There was investigating. That's not spying. Three, the fact that 4 Republican-appointed judges kept introducing this and approving the warrants repeatedly says that there was some information. And now, for whatever reason, the tactic seems to be let's attack the judges and let's attack the law enforcement agencies that are trying to protect this democracy. I don't understand it. Kevin?
No, that's almost none of that's accurate. And the point is not the judges. The judges were lied to. They were told that there was validating evidence coming from the press outlets. And what they relied upon was a press outlet that had reported on the story that was originally originated from the same people that produced the dossier. So you had
circular reporting, as they call it.
And that was supposedly reinforcing. And it would be okay if they had said to the judge, this is a report that depends on the dossier's evidence to make its claims, but they didn't do that. They lied to the judge. The judge, on some level, is very innocent here. He's just being presented the evidence that he has. He has to make the decision based on what they tell him. It was was the FBI officials and the DOJ people that were making the case that was the problem, not the judges
But what part is
themselves.
inaccurate? I mean, Carter Page wasn't surveilled while he was on the Trump campaign, so there was nobody spying on the Trump campaign.
The dossier has been largely debunked and not proven in the major findings that it has.
But what initiated this was them looking at George Papadopoulos in October 2016. The dossier wasn't
the FISA application makes it clear that the dossier was the lead piece of evidence and that Papadopoulos played almost no role in it whatsoever. The Nunez report has been vindicated today.
Big picture this for me, because I know that the two of you could go back and forth on this. So what Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch says, and you use a stronger word, he says that the judges were misled. And they did look at it more than once. You're right about that, Tiffany, but they're looking at basically the same information 3 or 4 times.
The same people
right?
coming back saying it still counts.
Yeah. So big picture for the American people, what's the takeaway?
Well, I think that there's been 2 competing narratives on what started this look into and turned into the special counsel investigation. This seems to justify the House Intelligence Committee and the other committee. It seems to justify their statement that this was not done on legitimate grounds. And so I think you're going to have greater questioning of the Mueller investigation going forward by people that want to know what the truth is.
But I would imagine most people are in agreement that the reason that we got a special counsel was because James Comey was no longer in position. I mean, that played a role too.
Partly, but you still had Comey and all the rest of the gang of whoever that was there making that case with this debunked or yet to be proven information going before a judge saying, oh, look, it validates itself.
Can I offer it as a quick takeaway?
Okay,
very quick. I think one party is trying to protect our democracy, and one party is trying to attack the agencies that are.
That's your opinion. Absolutely, you can own your opinion, but I hope that we're all looking at the facts, because no matter which party this would happen with, it's a problem.
What actually happened is what's got to be.
Democratic Socialist Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez say their agenda, once considered radical, is now mainstream in their party. Wow. Why that claim is raising concern among some Democrats and boosting Republican spirits. Stay close.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dana Perino. We're expecting a White House press briefing at the top of the hour, and we will have that for you live. Also, President Trump issuing a stern warning to Iran. What's behind the tough talk? And a closer look at those newly released FISA documents. The president say they prove investigators misled the courts, but we'll see. All that and more on the Daily Briefing.
I love a good debate. Well, socialist darling Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Bernie Sanders saying their agenda and ideas, like Medicare for all and a guaranteed living wage, are now mainstream within the Democratic Party. Here they are at rallies in Kansas and Missouri last week.
The ideas that we campaigned on, which a few years ago were seen to be radical ideas, are now mainstream ideas because of your support.
Power panel back, Kevin McCullough and Tiffany Cross. Tiffany, I'll start with you. How is it in the Democratic Party that you get a socialist agenda taking hold?
So I really think this is a narrative being pushed by Republicans. I don't think that
you don't think that she's a socialist? She calls herself one.
Yes, but I think that what they're pushing for, I think the word socialist will scare a lot of people, and that's why you hear a lot of people on the right.
That's what she is.
Well, I think a lot of people on the right are pushing it because they know it will scare a lot of people. But what she's calling for really isn't that inconsistent with what Democrats are calling for. I don't think it's so outrageous to call for Medicare for all, free college tuition, a $15 minimum wage.
Where's all that money going to come from?
I think there is.
It's going to be redistributed?
Well, if we have $12 million to pay for the president's military parade, I'm sure we could find some money to pay for free college tuition for all people and Medicare for all people.
Kevin?
Well, I do think that the Democrats have a dilemma on their hands for November. And I think that right now it's kind of like what the Tea Party and the pro-Trump people were dealing with establishment a few years ago. You've got people like Joe Crowley, who got bounced in the 14th Democratic primary. He's fighting back now. He's on the working party's line. He's going to try to take Cortez's seat or her nomination away from her. But look, there's a battle for the soul. Are they going to be a socialist-leaning kind of party that really Obama kind of paved the way for? Or are they going to be more of the traditional Rust Belt Union family kind of Democrats that still go to church? They're not into abortion and gay marriage and all this other stuff. They just want a few protections from government.
Let me
side
step
of
in
that
here.
wins
There's
that
some
is
people
gonna
called
determine
independents
November.
that both parties really want.
Right.
So you laid it out there, Kevin, and you did too, Tiffany. So how do you get those votes? Do you think they're going to embrace socialism?
Well, again, when you say socialism, I think most people...
It's not my word. They're democratic socialists.
Yes, I understand that, Harris. I'm not arguing that they're not democratic socialists.
But you're telling me the word is scary.
But I'm saying the collective you, not you, Harris. When people hear socialism, most people, if you ask the average American on the street, what does socialism mean? They don't know. If you talk to the average independent voter and say, hey, would you support a candidate who wants to give you Medicare? Would you support a candidate who supports a $15 minimum wage? Would you support
She wants to abolish ICE. Do you support that?
I don't support abolishing ICE just because I think as long as you have this administration in place, getting rid of ICE isn't going to change that many policies. But I do think there are a number of people who do support that call. I don't think that's such a scary thing. We survived a long time without ICE. ICE is only 15 years old. I don't think that's what Republicans can hang their argument on, why these candidates are so scary. I really think it's Republicans who are concerned that she's gaining such a national
So when Tiffany says that this word socialism has people running for the hills and that it's scary, what do you say?
Well, I don't think that that's necessarily true, and I think that a lot of the elites on the politically left, center-left scale like democratic socialism. So I think your celebrities, I think your academic elites, I think they embrace the Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez's kind of ideas, and they're going to give them a little bit of a boost just in welcoming them to their fundraisers and their wine and cheese parties and all the other stuff. One other thing. Bernie Sanders got ripped off in 2016, and his supporters are ticked, and they haven't forgotten about it. There's a reason why she was able to knock Mr. Crowley out of his seat in New York 14. It's because there's an anger within that base that is real. And if the mainstream Democrats don't recognize that, they're going to have a real battle for the soul come November, and that only benefits the Republicans.
All right, I'll bring you both back. And just to add to this conversation, Ocasio-Cortez, as you were talking about, Joe Crowley's name is still on the ballot. He says he supports her. We'll see how it plays out. We'll run the facts on that. Thank you both. We're awaiting the White House press briefing. And in addition to that, a little bit of an announcement coming up, too. So stay close.